My name is Margaret, and I have learned that some of the biggest moments in life arrive in the smallest ways, not with loud announcements or dramatic changes, but with a simple question asked at the right time. That is how it happened for me on a quiet afternoon when my grandson came to visit and asked me what love really means. These days, I live in a softer rhythm than I used to. My mornings begin slowly. I make my tea, sit near the window, and let the light settle into the room like a warm blanket. The world outside moves quickly, but inside my home, time feels calmer. I've come to appreciate the quiet, not because I never miss the noise of my younger years, but because the quiet gives me space to think. And thinking, I've learned, is one of the greatest gifts of growing older. You begin to see life not as a rush of events, but as a long story where meaning is hidden in small details. That afternoon, I had been sitting in my chair by the window when I heard footsteps in the hallway. There was a familiar knock, gentle, not hurried, and then my grandson's voice calling my name. When I opened the door, he stood there with a half smile, taller than the last time I had seen him, shoulders a little broader, his face carrying that mixture of youth and seriousness that comes when a child begins to step into adulthood. "Hi, Grandma," he said. His hug was careful, not because he didn't love me, but because he was starting to notice my age. Teenagers learn to be gentle in ways they don't even realize. He held me for a moment longer than usual, then stepped inside and looked around the living room like he was checking on something he couldn't name. I watched him quietly. I noticed how his eyes moved with thoughtfulness, how his posture carried something heavier than simple school worries. He took off his jacket, sat on the couch, and looked at me as if he had come for a reason beyond an ordinary visit. I made tea for both of us the way I always do. There is comfort in routine. The kettle hummed, the cups clinked softly, and the familiar smell of warm tea filled the kitchen. When I carried the cups to the table, he helped me without being asked. He moved one chair out for me and waited until I sat down. Small gestures, but they made my heart swell. Love shows itself in quiet ways like that, especially between generations. For a while, we talked about simple things: school, weather, a neighbor's new dog. He listened politely and smiled in the right places, but I could tell his mind was somewhere else. There was a restlessness in him, but not the noisy kind, the thoughtful kind, like he was carrying a question he wasn't sure how to open. Then, just as I was about to ask him if everything was all right, he said softly, "Grandma, can I ask you something?" I looked at him and saw sincerity in his face. "Of course," I said gently, "anything." He stared into his tea for a moment, as if the answer might be hiding in the steam. Then he lifted his eyes and asked, almost shyly, "What does love mean?" The question landed in my chest like a small stone dropped into water. It made ripples. It touched places in me that were still tender even after all these years. I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know, but because I suddenly realized how much love meant, how many shapes it had taken in my life. Love was not a single word to me. It was a long list of moments, sacrifices, joys, disappointments, choices, and forgiveness. It was laughter in the kitchen. It was crying alone at night. It was holding hands in hospital rooms. It was missing someone so deeply your body ached. It was also quiet peace beside a window when you realize you were lucky to have felt it at all. My grandson waited patiently, watching my face as if he had asked something too big. I reached across the table and placed my aged hand over his. His fingers were warm and strong, still young, still full of possibility. I squeezed lightly, then said softly, "That's a beautiful question." He nodded, his eyes serious. "People talk about love all the time," he said, "but I don't know if I understand it. Sometimes it seems like a feeling, sometimes it seems like a promise, sometimes it seems like pain." I felt tears gather quietly in my eyes, not out of sadness, but out of recognition. He was growing up. He was starting to see the world in a more complicated way, and he was trusting me enough to bring his confusion to my table. I took a slow breath. "Love," I began, "is many things, but the truest love is not just what you feel, it's what you choose." He leaned forward slightly, listening. I continued, "When I was young, I thought love was excitement, butterflies, music, the way your heart races when someone walks into the room. And yes, love can begin that way, but that isn't what keeps it alive." He watched me closely, as if trying to gather every word. I said, "Real love is staying, it's showing up, it's being kind when it would be easier to be cold. It's patience, it's respect, it's the decision to care even on days when you don't feel like a poet." My grandson smiled faintly, then shook his head. "Not work like punishment," I said. "Work like building something meaningful, like tending a garden. You water it, you protect it, you prune it when it grows wild, and sometimes you wait through seasons when nothing seems to bloom, but you don't abandon it because you believe something beautiful can still grow." He grew quiet, absorbing it. Then he asked, "How did you know Grandpa loved you?" That question tightened my throat. I looked down at my hand and remembered my wedding ring, the way it had rested there for decades, the way it had carried the weight of a life shared. I thought of my husband's voice, his laughter, his presence. I thought of the ordinary days that had become sacred because he was in them. I said, "He loved me in the way he stayed." I paused, then added, "He loved me in the way he made tea when I was tired, in the way he held my hand when I was afraid, in the way he listened even when he didn't have answers. Love is often quiet, sweetheart. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply sits beside you and says, 'I'm here.'" My grandson swallowed and nodded slowly, and I could see it, the beginning of understanding. And the beginning of understanding is sometimes all a young heart needs. My grandson sat there quietly, his fingers still under my hand as if he was holding on to the feeling of safety that comes from being heard. I could see his thoughts moving behind his eyes, the way the mind does when it is trying to arrange a new truth into place. After a moment, he asked softly, "But what if love doesn't last? I see people break up. I see families fight. Sometimes it feels like love is fragile." His honesty made me admire him. Many people hide those questions because they think doubt is shameful. But doubt is not shameful. Doubt is often the doorway to deeper wisdom. I nodded gently. "Love can be fragile," I admitted. "Not because it isn't strong, but because people are complicated. People carry wounds. People get tired. People forget how to speak gently. And sometimes, instead of taking care of love, they take each other for granted." He listened, and I could see he was relieved that I wasn't offering him a simple fairy tale. "But," I continued, "fragile doesn't mean useless. Think of a small candle. A candle flame is fragile. One gust of wind can put it out. Yet that flame can still warm a room, can still guide you through darkness. Love can be like that. It needs protection. It needs attention. It needs humility." He leaned forward again. So if you love someone, you have to protect it? Yes, I said softly, but not by controlling it. You protect love by respecting it, by being gentle with it, by not speaking words that cut too deep, by apologizing when you are wrong, by making space for another person's feelings. I paused for a second, letting the kettle's faint sound in the kitchen fill the silence between us. Then I added, and you protect love by remembering that love is not about winning, it's about understanding. That word, understanding, seemed to land on him like a new key. He looked down and said, almost to himself, "Sometimes I get angry fast, like I say things I don't mean, then I regret it." I squeezed his hand softly. "That's human," I said, "but you can learn. Love teaches you to slow down before you speak. It teaches you to ask yourself, will this sentence help or will it hurt?" My grandson nodded, and then he asked something that made my heart tighten again. "Did you and Grandpa ever fight?" I smiled because I could almost hear my husband laughing at that question. "Oh, sweetheart," I said with a soft chuckle, "of course we did. We were two different people trying to share one life. We disagreed about money sometimes, about parenting, about silly things like how the towels should be folded. We fought sometimes." His eyebrows lifted. "Then how did it work?" "It worked," I said gently, "because after the fighting, we returned to kindness." I could see he wanted details, so I gave him something he could hold. "When you argue," I explained, "there is a moment when you can choose. You can try to hurt the other person, or you can try to solve the problem. Love is when you choose the problem, not the person, as the enemy." That sentence made him stare at me with quiet surprise. Then he nodded slowly like he had just been given something important. I continued, "Sometimes love means saying, 'I'm sorry,' even if you feel justified. Sometimes love means listening when you would rather defend yourself. Sometimes love means walking away for a moment so you don't speak with heat instead of care." He was silent again, and I felt the heaviness in the room change into something more peaceful, like a deep breath. Then he asked, "Is love always romantic?" I shook my head. "No," I said firmly, but gently. "Love is bigger than romance. Love is friendship. Love is family. Love is caring for a neighbor. Love is the patience of a mother. Love is the loyalty of a father. Love is the way a grandparent listens to a grandchild without rushing." My grandson smiled a little. "So you love me like that?" I felt something soft rise in my chest. "Yes," I whispered. "I love you like that." He looked down, embarrassed in that teenage way, but I could tell my answer mattered to him. I poured him more tea. He watched the steam rise. Then he asked another question, quieter than the last. "Grandma, do you think love is supposed to hurt?" I swallowed. That was a question I wished every young person asked before they stepped into relationships without guidance. "Love can hurt," I said softly, "because love makes you vulnerable. When you care deeply, you can be disappointed. You can lose. You can miss someone. That pain is real." I paused and made sure my words were careful. But love should not hurt you through cruelty. Love should not make you afraid. Love should not make you feel small. If someone calls it love, but it breaks your dignity, then that is not love. That is control. That is selfishness. His eyes grew serious, as if he were storing those words for later. I could almost see him thinking about people he had known, friendships at school, conversations he had overheard. Then I softened my voice again and said, "The healthiest love feels safe. It feels like you can be yourself. It feels like your heart can breathe." My grandson's shoulders lowered slightly as if he had been holding tension without noticing it. He sat back and stared towards the window. The light outside had shifted into warm gold, and dust floated in the sunbeams like tiny dancing memories. In the quiet, I suddenly saw how quickly life moves between generations. I was sitting here with my old hands and silver hair, and across from me was the future, young, uncertain, full of questions, and I realized what a sacred moment this was. He turned back to me and said, "I think I understand a little more now." I smiled warmly. "Good," I whispered, "but remember, love is not something you only understand with your mind. You learn it by living it." He nodded, and for a while we simply sat there, sipping tea, letting silence speak for us. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels connected. And in that connected quiet, I realized that my grandson had not come to my home just to ask a question. He had come to be guided. And I was grateful life had allowed me to still be someone who could guide. And I was grateful that life had allowed me to still be someone who could guide. Because aging often makes you feel as if you are slowly stepping aside. The world begins to assume you are done teaching, done shaping, done contributing. Yet here I was, with my grandson sitting across from me, asking one of the most important questions a person can ask, and I realized that wisdom does not lose value with time. If anything, it becomes more precious. My grandson finished his tea and stared at the empty cup for a moment, as if he didn't want the conversation to end. Then he said quietly, "Grandma, do you think love is something you find or something you build?" That question made me smile, because it was the kind of question only a thoughtful heart asks. "I think love is both," I said. "Sometimes you find a person who feels familiar to your soul, but even if you find them, love doesn't just happen on its own. You build it, day by day, choice by choice." He nodded slowly. "So love isn't a single moment?" "No," I said softly. "Love is 1,000 moments." I leaned slightly forward and spoke with the tenderness I wished every young person could hear. Love is checking in on someone when they're quiet. Love is noticing when their smile looks tired. Love is making space for their fears without making them feel weak. Love is celebrating them when they succeed and holding them when they fail. Love is not only the big dramatic gestures people post about, it's the small, steady things no one applauds. He looked at me with a seriousness that made him seem older than his age, and I could feel the weight of responsibility, not the heavy kind, but the meaningful kind. I wanted my words to become part of his character, part of the way he would treat people in the future. So I told him one more truth, one I learned through years rather than books. Love, I said, is often quiet. He blinked. Quiet? Yes, I answered. It doesn't always shout, "I love you," loudly. Sometimes it shows love by simply staying, by being reliable, by showing up even when life is difficult. I paused, then added, "When your grandfather was alive, there were days when neither of us felt romantic. We were tired. Life was messy. Bills, responsibilities, worries. But love stayed. It stayed in the way he reached for my hand in the grocery store, in the way he made sure I ate when I was too busy caring for others, in the way he looked at me at the end of a long day, not with fireworks, but with warmth." My grandson listened like someone drinking water after thirst. I said, "When people only chase excitement, they miss love. Excitement fades. Love deepens." He whispered, almost to himself, "Deepens." "Yes," I said, Love becomes deeper when it survives misunderstandings, when it chooses forgiveness, when it grows into respect. Then I leaned back and let the sunlight touch my hands on the table. My hands looked old, veins visible, skin thin, fingers carrying the proof of time. I didn't hide them. I let him see them because they were part of the lesson too. These hands, I said softly, lifting them slightly, have done many things. They have held babies. They have wiped tears. They have worked hard. They have cooked meals and cleaned homes. They have written notes and packed lunches. They have held your grandfather's hand when he was afraid. My grandson's eyes softened. And love, I continued, is in all of that. Love is not only a word, it's a lifetime of small acts. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked gently. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the sacred conversation happening in my little kitchen. Then my grandson surprised me. He reached across the table and hugged me right there in the chair. Not a quick hug, a real one, the kind children give when they are still willing to be vulnerable. "Thank you," he whispered. I closed my eyes and held him with the calm strength I had earned over 72 years. In that hug, I felt the past and the future meet. I felt generations connected by something invisible but powerful. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were slightly shiny, but he tried to hide it. Teenagers do that. They want to feel deeply, but they also want to look strong. He stood up, put on his jacket, and headed toward the door. But before he left, he turned and said, "Grandma, I think love is what you just did." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He smiled softly. "You didn't just answer me. You listened. You didn't make me feel stupid. You made me feel safe." Safe. That word again. It seems love always returns to safety, doesn't it? I walked him to the door, and he hugged me once more. Then he stepped into the hallway and disappeared around the corner. The house became quiet again, but it was not lonely quiet. It was peaceful quiet, the kind that comes after something meaningful has happened. I returned to my chair by the window and sat down slowly. The evening light was warm now, turning everything soft. I held my teacup, now empty, and watched the sky changing colors. And I thought about what love really means. Love means being seen. Love means being heard. Love means being treated gently. Love means choosing kindness again and again, even when the world teaches you to be hard. If you are listening to my story right now, I want you to remember this. Love is not only something you feel in your chest. Love is something you do with your hands, your words, your patience, your forgiveness. Love is the quiet decision to care. And even when you grow older, love still has purpose. It still reaches forward. It still connects generations. It still teaches. As I sat by the window, the warm light resting on my silver hair, I let a gentle smile appear on my face because my grandson's question reminded me of something beautiful. Love is the only thing that doesn't grow old.